I think, so that we can be starting on time. Recording has started. The agenda is right in front of you. So welcome all, good morning, and assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you. My name is Muhammad Abdullah. I am a professor of Islamic Studies and the director of the Center for Islamic Thought and Education at the University of South Australia. And I am absolutely delighted to be hosting this session alongside with my colleague, Associate Professor Iner Sullivan, who is the director for the Center for Research in Educational and Social Inclusion, also at the University of South Australia. I welcome you all, particularly Mr. Tan, for his time to be with us today. I would like to also welcome all the speakers today and thank them for their time. Also, I would like to thank all the participants. We have had an excellent response to this event, and we expect more participants to join us. Before I proceed, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My colleagues and friends, recently the Australian Human Rights Commission published their significant report titled Sharing the Stories of Australian Muslims. And we thought it would be quite important to listen to about the report, to hear more about the report in terms of the process, the findings and recommendations. And I am absolutely delighted that Mr. Chintan, the Race Commissioner himself, agreed to be part of this event. And so we will start with Mr. Tan giving us a 25-minute presentation on the report, and therefore allow me to introduce the Race Commissioner, Mr. Chintan, who commenced his term as Race Discrimination Commissioner on October 8th, 2018. He is a recognized and established community leader and is a strong, passionate advocate for a successful multicultural Australia, where the rights of all Australians, irrespective of their race or cultural backgrounds, are protected and respected. He has extensive frontline and hands-on experience in engaging and working with culturally diverse communities. Mr. Tan has had multiple positions before assuming the role of Race Discrimination Commissioner, including being the chairperson and statutory head of the Victorian Multicultural Commission from 2011 to 2015. He also was the co-chair of the Police and Community Multicultural Advisory Committee and served in many other organizations and bodies. This includes the Australian Football League's Multicultural Focus Group, professional and business associations, and local council committees. Please join me in welcoming the Commissioner. The floor is yours, Commissioner. Thank you.
See, mute always does it to me, so I do apologize. I haven't got used to it. Good morning to you all. If I appear a bit starstruck, that's because we are on the 6th lockdown here in Melbourne, which is where I live. Even though we're based in Sydney, is where my office is, and haven't been there for quite a while now. So I know it's very difficult times for a lot of Australians who are facing difficult situations about lockdowns and confronting COVID-19. So I wish you well. And I say to Professor Abdullah, spare a prayer for us here in this part of Australia at a time where it is probably very needed. But thank you all for the invitation. Very delighted to be here with you, joining in speaking about the report that we released recently. So let me start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining you today, the lands of the Kulin Nation. I would like to acknowledge their connection to land, waters, and community, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and their emerging leaders. And to all Muslim brothers and sisters who are here with us today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for the very kind introduction and kind welcome, Professor Abdullah. I want to extend my thanks to you personally for the not just the invitation to speak today, but for the ongoing work that you do in advancing a common cause to make Australia a better place to live in for all Australians. And to each of the speakers who will come after me, your names are on the list. To each of you, I acknowledge you and I thank you for your participation. And I also look forward to the questions from the floor. And afterwards, in fact, I want to devote more time for that because it will allow me to tease out and for you as well to find completion in getting some of the answers about what are the things that will be of interest to you. On 20th July of this year, the Commission released the Sharing the Stories of Australian Muslims report, which I call in short the SSAM report. In the aftermath of the Christchurch horror, I resolved to engage with Australian Muslims to have a conversation, to hear their experiences, concerns, and to share their stories. It was not an exercise in the nature of a survey, inquiry, or investigation into the state and conditions of Muslims within our community. Rather, we merely set out to have an intimate discourse with Australian Muslims at a time that I believe, and we believe at the Commission, that they were obviously facing great challenges, both at a personal and community level. We wanted to hear from Australian Muslims, for them to tell their stories, share ideas for change, but equally important, to provide them with a voice and to be better and to be clearly heard. So it was also in some respect for me and for the Commission, in one way, I suppose to call it our pilgrimage to offer our support and solidarity to members of a community that were clearly hurting and in pain. The report was also intended to build a robust general public understanding of the experiences of Australian Muslims. The report reflects the experiences and concerns of over 1,000 Australian Muslims from across the country who participated in an online survey and in 37 in-depth consultations. I want to thank those who participated and some of the participants who are here with us today for generously sharing your time and stories. I want to thank you personally as well, because when we traveled across the country for the consultation, we, and my team and I, we were warmly welcomed with such great generosity and grace. So thank you very much for your support and for welcoming us. The report shows that most Australian Muslims, and that's 63%, believe Australia is a welcoming society, despite an even greater majority, 80%, experiencing prejudice or discrimination. 3 in 4, 74% of Australian Muslims said they felt Australian, but 1 in 4, 23%, said they felt unable to speak up when they experienced discrimination. So in that sense, they felt disempowered. The research findings show that Muslim communities are incredibly resilient despite experiencing widespread discrimination. Further, Muslim communities unquestionably make significant economic, community, and charitable contributions to Australian society. At a recent interview with a mainstream media on this report, the interviewer put to me that the report represented or presented a mixed bag of results, reflecting, as he did, on the apparent inconsistency of the high percentage of Australian Muslims in the report who felt Australian and who believe Australia is a welcoming society, against an equally high percentage who also experienced prejudice or discrimination. I had to explain to him that there was no inconsistency in the results from the report. It was a relatively easy task for me to do, as coming as I did as a migrant of Chinese heritage and finding my home here and with my family in this country. The message in these results speak clearly to me, as it does, I believe, to many Australians from diverse backgrounds, that they love Australia, are thankful for the welcome they have received and have found a home here. And yet, despite the love of this country and working as they do, and I know they do, working tirelessly to ingrain themselves and their families into the fabric of this wonderful country, they are still subject to unacceptable levels of prejudices, discrimination, and racism. If there is an inconsistency and an incongruence, it is this, that as a country, we have not resolved the grave inconsistency of prejudices, discrimination, and racism that still plague the lives of far too many Australians, preventing them the equality and belonging that they are entitled as their birthright as Australians. The report provides a clear call for change through 9 community identified solutions that participants in the project have identified. I know the topic of today's discussion mentioned about recommendations. We've set out very clearly from the start that we weren't looking at recommendations. There are far too many recommendations as your report and your own experiences have indicated. We wanted to get the sense of what the communities themselves are saying to us, is what might be workable solutions that reinforced very much the many recommendations have gone in the past. So these solutions address community concerns and are designed to work towards a more equal and harmonious society for all Australians. They prioritize meaningful engagement with Muslim communities and advocate for more interfaith and public awareness education. The report identifies opportunities for building better training and representation across the media and in workplaces, while strengthening industry frameworks and legislative protections across the country against Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. You and I know this, and it's not enough to simply condemn and counter racism. The report findings and solutions highlight the need for a coordinated national strategy that works on many fronts to actively counter racism and discrimination at the various levels that it occurs, and with clearly identified principles, goals, and targets. The Human Rights Commission's current National Anti-Racism Framework project is progressing this vision for a national action to be taken on racism and advocating for the framework through the lens of the SSAM findings. The Commission called for the development of a national anti-racism framework in March of this year. The National Anti-Racism Framework will be a long-term central reference point to guide actions on anti-racism and inequality in this country by all levels of government, peak bodies, NGOs, communities, educators, business, and other sectors. There has been limited discussions and discourse about race in this country, and particularly among our national leaders, and little in the way of national initiatives and activities focused on protecting and promoting the rights of all Australians to be free from discrimination based on race, ethnicity, cultural identity, or nationality. There is, however, a broad-ranging worldwide conversation that's happening even as we speak about racism and racial equality, as well as the importance of anti-racism culture and campaigns and activism and maintaining social cohesion and harmony, and as an issue of national security and safety as well. The proposal we put forward is a starting point only, designed to begin discussions about what an anti-racism framework could look like in Australia. As we together undertake further in-depth consultations and engagements to develop the framework, a series of interfaith roundtables are planned, as well as a series of workshops on priority issues. These include issues of online hate, media regulation, and definitions of racism, anti-racism, and social cohesion, all themes relevant to solutions identified in the SSAM report. Key Muslim faith leaders and Muslim stakeholders will be included in these roundtables and workshops to progress solutions relating to religious discrimination and legislative protections, as well as in relation to media representation and guidelines. Stakeholders will also be able to make a submission to the Commission as part of the public submissions process for the framework set out that we will set out to commence in October of this year. In well, don't hold me to it firmly because it is a work in progress, and we will endeavor in terms of our timeline to get to the consultation with the public as early as we can, hopefully by October of this year. In addition, the solutions identified in the SAM report will be progressed to the Commission's Racism It Starts With Me campaign, which is happening in tandem with the framework initiative. The campaign is currently undergoing a refresh and will be an important advocacy and capacity building tool under the overarching framework. The campaign will also include Muslim campaign ambassadors, work to build capacity for non-Muslim allyship, meaning people who might traditionally be attached or knowledgeable about Muslim and Muslim issues, and prioritize Australian Muslims in its supporter engagement. Further, the update of the Commission's Workplace Diversity Tool will progress the SAM report solution related to improving cultural competence in Australian workplaces. As has been highlighted in the report, has been an important element and an arena for which discrimination needs to be dealt with, i.e. workplaces. It will seek to include specific content around improving cultural competence and interfaith understanding. The Commission also intends to continue public messaging about the SAM finding and to pursue some of the solutions that have been identified with governments and with the community at large. And this including amplifying Muslim community initiatives, reports, and research. The race discrimination team, and I have a very small team, so we will need your support in the work that we do. The team will work to identify interconnections between the findings and solutions of the SAM report and other Commission work, including the Free and Equal Project, which many of you will have come across and know about, and the work that has been initiated and run by the President of the Human Rights Commission, also around religious discrimination, which will, in fact, in the next few months, come to the fore for discussion because of the government's latest initiative in putting that religious freedom bill for discussion. Everyone, and I mean everyone, deserves to be treated equally and with dignity and respect, whatever their religion, race, or culture. Australia prides itself on being a diverse country where equality, fairness, and opportunity are afforded to all. And if we are to live up to these values, urgent national attention is required. Supporting and including diverse communities to thrive benefits the whole country. It enriches our cultural diversity and strengthens our social cohesion. And as I've said in my message in the report, we can only build a strong and harmonious, socially cohesive community if we embrace and accept everyone in our culturally diverse society, including our Muslim Australians. So thank you once again for the invitation to share and discuss these findings and solutions with you today. And I'm sure many of you have read the findings, so I'm keen for a discussion about some of the findings and some of the issues arising from the report and how we can further the aim of and objective of that report, which to highlight the issues confronting Australian Muslims and how we can move forward to finding better solutions that make for a better community that we lived in. So I look forward to your responses and questions and to further discussions about advancing the SAM solutions through the National Anti-Racism Framework and through our Racism It Starts With Me campaign. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what the other speakers have to say and to your discussions on this matter. Thank you very much. Keep safe and take care of yourself too. Professor, up to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was a very good and excellent overview of the report and the findings, very succinct and to the point. We have a panel of 4 excellent presenters who are experts in multiple fields, and each will be given 5 minutes to respond to the Commissioner. And after they have completed their responses, we will open the floor for discussion and Q&A. And we're tracking quite well with time. So thank you, Commissioner, for being.
Sorry, I'm a very fast speaker.
No, excellent. It gives us 15 minutes extra for the Q&A. So the panel that we have chosen, as I said, are experts in diverse fields, ranging from Islamophobia to legal expertise on responding to hate and dehumanization of Muslims, to social inclusion, education, and so forth. And so our first respondent is Dr. Derya Iner, who is a senior lecturer and research coordinator at the Center for Islamic Studies at Charles Sturt University, teaching and researching subjects on contemporary issues related to Islam, Islamic culture, and Muslims. Her research focuses particularly on Islamophobia in Australia, Islamophobia and hate crime, and especially women and children's experiences with Islamophobia. Dr. Iner, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Selamun Aleyküm. Thank you for organizing this session. It was really fresh when the Australian Human Rights Commissioner's report just has been released, and now we are discussing it. That's really important discussion. Thank you for the program, and thanks to the attendees as well, spending their morning with us. And I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. The report is really important for many reasons. It is this time not community trying to show Islamophobia is really devastating and Islamophobia kills. Now the commissioner's project showed symbolically that this is the problem of Australia, Australians' problem. It is a nationwide problem. It's not Muslims' issue, or it's not Muslims' problem. So I think it was a really important message, and it was a timely message as well, because this project was conducted right after the Christchurch to be able to capture the community's senses and responses to that devastating experience. So, and we haven't seen any projects so far looking at the post-Christ Muslim community's response. That's why it's really important. Also, the report design is important, valuable. It's not just from top down. We are looking at research people, or a group of people for research purposes. The design really shows that the intention is genuine. It is consultation-based and participatory, but also solution-oriented. Knowledge brings responsibility. Now we have all these findings. What is next? And we hear this from the community as well. When I was going through the report, I can sense the frustration of the community, a disappointment, but also what is next? What else can be worse? So what do you suggest? And even now solutions, they are really right on the spot, and excellent suggestions. And I can hear that sense of frustration and demand to take action. And in this action, Mr. Chin really explained us some initiatives in this space. They are very valuable. But we also need to recognize the fact that a lot of people are saying we are multicultural. We don't have any problem with any people but Muslims. We can see that exceptionalism. So we are okay, but without Muslims. We are okay with everything without mosques. So there is and all the research, when we look at, for example, social cohesion and other projects as well, we are coping at some point, with other ethnic communities, but when it comes to Muslims, so it spikes always. Maybe we need to have also some projects really tapping into anti-Muslim hate and anti-Muslim racism as well. I mean, we need to maybe capitalize this as well. So in the question and answer part, I would like to really hear about what we do in this space, or what can we do in this space as well. And coming back to Christchurch experience, we also hear, I think, multiple impacts of Islamophobia, especially after Christchurch, and the devastating effect as well. Women are taking their hijab, or their family members are telling them to do so. They're already facing discrimination. When they go to mosque, the first thing they do is to check exit doors in case some attack happens, what to do. So this mentality and living with this is really bad. And Islamophobia Register Australia indeed captured over 80 severe incidents right after the Christchurch. So in the first and second week of the Christchurch attack. So it's not going any better. And it is really impactful. And we had another project on mosques, and we found in Australia over around 58% of mosques across Australia experience some form of hate. So again, problem is there, and it is growing and increasingly growing. So what is really next? Tangible, I think, steps to address these particular issues, and what is the healing process as well. We are talking about destructive impact, so what is our maybe solutions to that as well. I really find these reports valuable, especially because community trusted in the Human Rights Commission, explaining their workplace discrimination experiences, because this is not an easy thing to discuss. And the reports, yes, and when we look at Islamophobia register reports, this is the least type of incident report, because it is like a Pandora box. You don't want to open it because there is no solutions. That's why I think it's important to discuss workplace discrimination and systematic discrimination as well. So in response, I think we really need to look at what we can do all together. And Commissioner already started that, but Islamophobia Register as a community organization, one of the earliest establishment tackling issue under women leadership and collecting incident reports as well. We need to foster it further and work together, and maybe we can ask what else we can do in this space. And again, this project was really an eye-opener, but the question is, what is next? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iner. Wonderful response. Our next respondent is Ms. Rita Markwell, who is a solicitor at Birchgrove Legal. She joined the firm in 2021, and she has a rich experience in public policy and legal advocacy work, which she gained from her professional experience. She is also a legal advisor to the Australian Muslim Advocacy Network, which uses policy and research dialogue, political and media engagement, and litigation strategy to protect the Australian Muslim community from mainstream prejudice. Sister Rita, floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hello, good morning. It was very good to follow Sister Derya, Dr. Derya, who is obviously a leading researcher and investigator of Islamophobia in Australia. And we also pay my respect to the Islamophobia Register, which has been doing so much heavy lifting in this space for many years. I just want to acknowledge I'm speaking from Jagera lands. I want to pay my respects to our Afghan brothers and sisters right now, who I know have a very heavy heart, are under a full weight of emotion. And I also want to thank Professor Mohammed Abdullah and Commissioner Chintan for this, for not only this event, but the report. You have provided a platform for our community and brought a lot of forward thinking about the next steps to the table. And that's my focus here. I'm going to focus on the law. There is a big gap at the moment, unfortunately, with our laws. So in Australia, we have the Race Discrimination Act, which doesn't cover religion. It does. We can sort of achieve some protection through the Race Discrimination Act in a roundabout way, potentially. But we also have some vilification laws and discrimination laws at the state level that we can use that do protect religion. However, their relationship with the online world and online sphere is very disconnected. We have tested these laws. Obviously, we just won an action against Fraser Anning with 141 hate artifacts ordered to be taken down. This was extremely time-consuming and emotionally toxic work for us, a year and a half of labour. And the content is still not taken down. We've lodged another complaint through the Australian Human Rights Commission against Facebook. That could be another 2 years, and we don't know what sort of practical outcomes that could achieve. So the Australian government could legislate right now to impose a duty of care on digital platforms, on social media companies, to not be contributing to serious harm when it comes to hate speech and disinformation. It's been done in the in Europe, and the UK is currently looking at a statutory duty of care. We would like the same thing to happen here, and it could be done. Amman has also done a lot of work into dehumanization and its operation online. A lot of this, violent extremism and terrorism researchers are now tuning into the fact that dehumanization of groups is a major tactic of violent extremist movements. And dehumanization has also been linked to just about every atrocity and genocide in history. Dehumanization is where a class of persons, based on their race or religion or whatever protected characteristic, they are deprived of all positive human qualities, painted as subhuman, and as a result, people who are consuming dehumanizing materials will believe that that group no longer deserves protection from violence, and it removes any moral barriers to violence. Brenton Tarrant, in his essay following Christchurch, referred to Muslims as a nest of snakes, and that's how he justified the need to kill children as well, because they grow up to become big snakes. So we are absolutely dedicated to lifting the profile of dehumanization as a harm. And we really think it's important that the voices of communities that are endangered, that they are taken seriously at the policy table, included, just as the recommendations of this report show. Engagement is really important. We have proposed amendments to the Online Safety Act that would impose civil penalties on individuals and on platforms that serially dehumanize certain groups, classes of persons based on a protected characteristic. And we believe that it is a very strategic way to, and a very practical and way to target harm that is endangering our community. And we can see the results. Most of it is done through disinformation, which, is an area which is now affecting our community very broadly through COVID as well. So we have a lot to contribute to this space. And the word I just want to say is that I also note that the Australian government tends to be inclined to moving towards expanding their security apparatus to deal with a lot of these problems. And that poses further problems for our community. We already have an issue with the definition of terrorism in Australia, including the word religious cause, and the way that really centres our religion within the terrorism discourse. We would like that to, I would like that to be removed and to just use ideological cause. There's a lot of, in terms of our legal frameworks, there's a lot of work that we can do to make our community and the whole community safer. But we don't have to do it through expanding our security powers. We can do it through better civil penalties and frameworks for our digital platforms and actors that are weaponizing them. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. And our next respondent is my dear colleague, Associate Professor Iner Sullivan, who is the Director of the Center for Research in Educational Social Inclusion and Social Inclusion at the University of South Australia. The center is known as CRESI, and it undertakes research that creating a society that fosters educational and social inclusion. She is also professorial lead, research, performance and evaluation in UniSA Education Futures. Dr. Sullivan, thank you, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed, and the other speakers. I really would like to commend the report. I come in my capacity as the director of a centre that's really interested in researching issues around identifying the exclusion, the factors that contribute to exclusion in education, drawing on social broader issues, but also the hopeful alternatives and what it might look like and how do they connect. And I'd like to report some research that was undertaken in our centre where we were looking at multiculturalism. So to pick up on the report's call for further education and more cultural competence and understanding in education systems, I guess, in Australia. So I thought today I might just talk about a critical policy analysis that we did to understand the construction of school education systems policies in this highly political context. And to do this, we really focused on the issue of multiculturalism. So the first multicultural policy in Australia was released in 1978. And when we look at the shifts over time, we did a historical analysis to understand what's going on in that space. And then we undertook an analysis of 2 education departments and their education policies to see how they're currently reflecting or not that sort of federal government position. And what we did is we drew on some understandings of multiculturalism because the word is understood in different ways. And in the past, in the early days of the multiculturalism and the federal policy, it took on a notion of cultural pluralism, which is based on inclusion, where cultural identities, values and practices are accepted and coexist in a broader society. We've moved more recently to understanding multiculturalism more framed as a liberal agenda, which sets out sort of terms which foster an illusion of change and inclusiveness without really substantially disrupting the racialised patterns of power and privilege. And it focuses more on assimilation and integration into our society and to the norms of our society. So when we did the historical analysis of Australian multicultural policy since its inception in the late 70s, we found it moved from a very long period of focusing more on sort of cultural pluralism, which recognised and accommodated the needs of migrant groups and multicultural policy. It remained pretty stable over the first couple of decades. However, with increasing numbers of new arrivals and concerns about the dilution of Australian values, it began to shift from a focus on social justice to social cohesion, and they're very different ideas. The influence of terrorism in international areas and government instability really created a period of quite significant volatility in which social inclusion and cultural diversity became dominant driving forces. So most recently, Australia has settled on a policy called the Multicultural Australia, United, Strong and Successful in 2017. And like Rita says, this is a framework that guides decisions, actions and practice in Australia. And it was a product of these shifting ideologies and attitudes. So once where multicultural policy was intended to promote coexistence and inclusion, it's now really focused more on shared values, equality of opportunity and social and economic participation. The focus on people learning English, the focus on people getting jobs and being economically sufficient as, I can't think of the right word there. At the same time, while we've got that happening at the federal level with multiculturalism, we've got education systems around the world increasingly focused on the idea of inclusion for students. And so in Australia, we've got that happening in this political environment that is increasingly focused on integration. So the dominant ideology of inclusion, which is based on shared values, equality of opportunity, and social and economic participation, has replaced the notions of acceptance and coexistence. So we investigated these some departmental policies, and you'll note that many departments of education around Australia are really finding commitment and finding policies and forming policies that are focused on inclusion, well-being, and learning in their policies. So there's a sense of hope in the policies that departments can sort of resist this dominant ideology that's driven by the federal, at the federal level, and find ways that actually attend to issues of equity and social justice. But we also found policies which reflected the federal government's view that English matters, that everyone just needs to be given the same opportunity, and therefore it's up to people to take their own space. So it's with hope, I think, that we need to support education departments, which then set the policy agenda for schools that provide really inclusive environments that attend to the different needs of groups and individuals within our school sector, and that don't bring about a sense of sameness that needs to sort of, that they have to fit into our society. So that was all I had to say, Mohammed. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, wonderful. Thank you so much. As the previous respondents also provided some very rich responses there, and I'm sure it's stimulating a lot of thought. And last but not least, Dr. Melanie Bach is a senior lecturer in UniSA Education Futures and the co-convener of the Migration and Refugee Research Network. She is a member of the Center in Research for Educational and Social Inclusion, and her research and teaching interests broadly cover areas of equity and inclusion, particularly in schools with a focus on refugee education and resettlement. Dr. Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity, Professor Mohammed, to speak today. And like the other speakers, I'd like to commend the Commissioner for this very timely and important report and the information that it contains. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people, like most of us at UniSA, and would like to also acknowledge our privilege in living on these lands. And I think within that context, we can't talk about matters of race, racism, inclusion and discrimination in Australia without also thinking about the persistent discrimination and racism experienced by the First Nations peoples of Australia. I'd like to perhaps provoke some further thought that we might build on further from the report. And one of the thoughts that I have that draws from some recent research that I've been working on with students in schools is perhaps a concern I have around the conflation of racism and racial-based discrimination with religious-based discrimination. And I wonder if there's a risk in conflating these two, that we may, I guess, make invisible the intersectional and varying identities of Muslim Australians. And I come to that from a perspective. Just recently, I was doing a round table with a group of young people in a school. And at that round table, there were students from Afghanistan, Sudan, Ethiopia, Syria, all students from refugee backgrounds, varying religious, cultural, racial, ethnic and linguistic backgrounds. And it was really interesting to hear from these students. So for example, the male students from Afghanistan, in a way in the schoolyards are able to make themselves invisible within super diverse schools where cultural diversity is the norm. Their visibility is less pronounced than, say, for example, I can vividly remember two young women from Sudan, Muslim women who wore hijabs and were hyper visible within their schools as Black women of colour who also were visibly identifiable as Muslim. So I think while the report on page 57 does consider gender, there's perhaps a bit of an invisibility around the other multiple forms of intersectional identities for Muslim Australians. There's no consideration of Blackness. And I think this visibility of religion was discussed, say, on page 48, where one participant was quoted as choosing not to wear a hijab so she could, I guess, pass within the mainstream. And also another male participant talked about the difference of how he was viewed when he had a longer beard compared to when he didn't have the beard. So I think there's a visibility that also comes along those intersectional identities that needs some further consideration as well. The other thing I think that aligns with that, talking about social cohesion, the Mapping Social Cohesion report from the Scanlon Foundation, which has come out annually for a number of years and twice last year, which is quite interesting. Their November 2020 report found, for example, that 34% of Australians have negative sentiment towards persons of Muslim faith, whereas 49%, almost 50% feelings towards immigrants from Sudan. So again, if we think about these intersecting identities and the varying forms of discrimination that people may experience on the basis of race, religion, or a combination of the two, some further consideration needs to be given to those intersections of identity. The other point that I was keen to talk to was in relation to chapter 10 of the report on countering violent extremism and social cohesion. Another research project I've been involved with over the past couple of years has been looking at how a particular project and program within South Australia enacted countering violent extremism work and program within schools in South Australia. And this was through a federally funded countering violent extremism program. But the policy makers at the state level were really conscious of the ways this term or phrase, countering violent extremism, automatically positions and sort of aligns with assumptions of Muslim identities and Muslim extremism, which is actually counter to what we currently know, that the highest risks of extremism are actually from far right-wing extremist movements rather than Muslim extremist movements. So the two policymakers that were working within the Department of Education and another department here at the state level were conscious of this, and in developing the program, although they'd had a program that was funded for countering violent extremism, decided that they shouldn't use that term at all in entering schools. They made a really conscious decision that CVE, or preventing violent extremism, PVE, was not going to be a term that was used. So they went instead into schools and developed this program under the term of what they called extreme behaviours. And in describing then to schools the ideologies and the ways that might come out and how they could, I guess, engage with that at a school level, they tried to resist those stereotypes, because the interviews we did with them, they said, as soon as we go into a school and talk about countering violent extremism, we'll get all these recommendations for Muslim students who happen to have mentioned Al-Qaeda or something similar. So in doing this, they were actively resisting those discourses and trying to change the discourses. So I think the report suggests a need for more allies. And I think these are examples of the ways in which allies can work to be conscious of the language and the discourses, whether these are allies within media, allies within policymaking, allies within schools, just shifting the discourse and the language and challenge the framing of particular marginalised groups within Australia can come a long way in doing. So thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. And we are running on time, believe it or not, which is unusual for events. So well done. Well, we heard from the Commissioner, Race Commissioner, Mr. Tan. We heard from all the respondents. So I'd like to open the floor first if Mr. Tan would like to respond to any of the concerns which were raised. And of course, indeed, for the panelists to ask questions directly to Mr. Tan, and for the participants to either post their questions on the chat box or raise your hand so that you may ask. There are already a few questions in the chat box, which I will come to in a second. But did you want to respond to any of the concerns, Mr.
Yes,
Tan?
thank you, Professor Abdullah. I just forgot, I congratulate you for your AM award, and obviously very well deserved. I know it's been a while now, but I didn't have a chance to catch up with you. So congratulations. I'm very happy to see the award, particularly reflecting diversity and real talent in contributions to the framework of the Australian community. So thank you and congratulations for that. Very, very helpful and productive comments right across on different issues, right across on policy issues in terms of where to go from here, in terms of intersectionality, all taken on board, all reflected clearly in what we want to do. The report obviously, unfortunately, has a limited capacity in terms of where the agenda might take us. Intersectionality is an interest to me, obviously. Women, children in different religious background, cultural background who suffer and need to be looked at differently, refugees, a whole range of issues. But the report has a very limited capacity to share a story at a very quick pace in roughly 80 pages, limited resources, capacity. What it was designed to do was simply saying, look, there are issues out across there. And I think you look at the report, it's peppered right across. CV has picked up issues of women being, in fact, particularly picked on, particularly of the appearances. It's a very big feature of what Muslims are telling us as well. They're visible. The question of religious, racial intersectionality is a big one, huge, and also defined by the way we have sectionalized the policy treatment of issues. I'm the Race Discrimination Commissioner. I'm not Religious Discrimination Commissioner. The RDA does not deal with religion. So that hamstrings me, and we have not found the answers. We need to find answers to deal with that. And there's going to be possibly Religious Freedom Act, or I would prefer it to be Religious Discrimination Act, because there's a difference there. So we're having a discussion about that, and question, where do I sit when as a commissioner looking after religion? How does it intersect? And it might make sense in the policy framework, but in real life, you can't separate and carve out people in saying you're religious, you're racial, a Sudanese, or you're Muslim. Well, it doesn't happen that way. So these are the difficulties. Intersectionality is another big issue as well. And the other difficulty, of course, is I've got a sex discrimination commissioner as well. He's got responsibilities in some of those areas. And so question, how do we get all together into one? And we haven't got to there. And that leads me to Iner Sullivan's discourse on multiculturalism. And I'm being blunt about this, and I should be very careful as a public servant about being blunt about these things, but I'm not a really terribly good public servant in that sense. I came from the community, and my vision is about a different perspective of my contribution. And people said, I'm a statutory appointee anyway. Well, so be it, it doesn't matter. But for me is this, do we really have a multicultural policy, long-standing? It is a government-induced policy. Can you find for me where I can find a multicultural statement about where we are, apart from a statement that comes up from the Prime Minister's department? So we don't have that. And therefore, the push for a framework for me was a default way of saying, that's a way of getting around all of that and saying, if nothing else, we're coming together and say, there's a statement out there about how we look at race discrimination. I wish there was an opportunity to look at multiculturalism, that we don't have a commission on multiculturalism, social cohesion in this country at the federal level. So we can't really go there, even as much as I like to, because it's a portfolio which is, it's got other people looking after it. So I'm limited by the race aspect. So for me, it was important to find an angle to open doors, to then talk about the larger framework about social cohesion, the place of Muslims or Jews in this country, indigenous, and how the framework will be looking like for us to have a discussion saying, how we see race issues and discourse around issues and solutions into the future. It's going to be an imperfect document because it's a big document, but at least we have a document out there that sets a very basic framework of fundamental issues in alignment about saying we care about race issues, race relations in this country, social cohesion, and this is how we see it, and we will frame it. It'll be a living document, I hope, that'll be refreshed, rebooted, there'll be, in fact, enhanced as the next generation comes aboard. But at least it'll be said, you'll be saying to your children that there is a framework in Australia, not a campaign of 4 years that finished this, from 4 years ago, as a framework, and this is our framework. Now, my view and hope is it won't be a document that languishes there. It'll be a document that speaks to us, and it'll always be growing, and it'll be refreshed from time to time. So the framework was an attempt to bring this country to discussion. When I launched in March this year, I didn't do it because I had $4 million behind me, and I have people are signing up saying, yes, we are, and the government saying we're back you. I had none of that, but I took it on and said, let's do it. And the whole idea is then to bring people along, and government's coming along with us, having discussion, bring some funding and say, yep, we like the idea, but what's in it? And that's the point. What's it going to be in it? So the train has moved from its from its original point of a starting point, and then we'll move to a position where we'll get it paced. But what's in it, as we did with the project that we did in this SAM report, is it'll be about people telling us what matters most. And you talk about discourse, about media portrayal, narratives, and all that. It's terribly important. This framework offers an opportunity. For my take on the Muslim issue, is the Muslim community, is the Jewish community, indigenous, I wanted what they call perpetual race problems. They are the incessant ones. They're always going to be there for some reason. They're always going to be Jewish, the Muslim problem, or indigenous problems. There'll be some that come and go because of the circumstances as we face with the Chinese and Asian racism in the last 12 months. But we need to deal with those intractable problems about how Australia see its place in the race issues as it's confronting the indigenous Muslims and the Jewish community as well. And we need to find answers in a very tangible and deep-rooted way for us to move forward. For me, I'm a policy wonk, even though I'm not really an expert in this particular area. So we deal with actions and behaviors. But to do a better job in trying to get to a position where we become more able to live together more peacefully would take a far more deeper cultural shift. And the question is, who is doing that? Governments don't necessarily do a good job in that area. And there's a reason why in countering extremism, we put money in law and order, not about social narratives and political narratives about where it's happening. And I've been saying to Asia and the AFP, let us in. We have a role to play. We've got a very big role to play. We do a better job in our area. There's less for you to worry about. But it seems to doesn't get the focused because we always want to attack what the violence is and not understand where it's coming from. So this is about our job in a sense of trying to get attention to government, to communities, and focusing on what are the issues that we need to talk about. And you talk about, and I'll finish up, Professor, very quickly, on assimilation and multiculturalism. We haven't defined many of that. Australia is not big on big documents and statements about values like the Americans do and entrenched it. So in terms of multiculturalism, we never had multicultural policies. So we moved on to multiculturalism in the 70s. We tweaked it, and we tweaked it how we always like to use immigration policies. And suddenly we became multicultural because we allow everybody else in, right? And that's how we got rid of the white policy. But we also use a multicultural immigration policy to make our country a racist white country in 1901. Again, these are the framework in which we move. But I think we need to have a serious discourse as a country saying, if we value these things, we need to put it somewhere where it matters, where it sits properly. And so the framework is an opportunity for us to do that. The campaign that we're running is great, but it's going to run for 4 years, 3 years. It will pique our interest, it will provoke us, it will make us think, and it will put in a better place. But in 4 years' time, most people said, oh, I remember that, it was very good. So what? So the framework is an important opportunity, and I implore the Muslim community to travel with us, to use this opportunity to define and construct for the Muslim community an important element of narratives. The Muslim community, in the two ways of looking at it, is this: we need to deconstruct all the false narratives about the Muslim community and reconstruct a proper one. And that's a big job, right? In the psyche and in the policy of Australians thinking, I see Muslims differently now because, this narrative is a false, incorrect one. And how do we do that? I don't have all the answers. I know a little bit of what I can do. And so we need to do that. And it's about having this conversation. The report is important for me in the one other respect is this. It's on a survey. I can go to government and anybody else. We spoke to the Muslim communities by and large, and they told us this. So don't tell me otherwise, please, because they have spoken through us. And this is an important element. If you want to listen to that.
Excellent, wonderful. That's very rich. And I have about 4 questions, which I'll get to in a second, but I was wondering if any of the panelists would like to add to that, respond to that, comment on what Mr. Tan has just mentioned. Rita?
Yeah, I was just very briefly, I was just going to say there are a lot of different audiences that we're dealing with, and some are more hardened than others, I suppose, in their views. But we also have the reality that a lot of people don't accept racism as a problem, and they interpret this whole conversation as, oh, you're saying Australia is racist, and it sort of gets stuck and lost, which is why a lot of we're seeing, the research from Victoria University talking about local government dialogues where you bring people together to actually talk about their grievances and have conflict in their conversation, which in broader parameters, which isn't just about racism, but is about social cohesion and belonging for everybody. And I also just wanted to point to the work of Jabri-Markwell in New Zealand, who's been running social cohesion dialogues across New Zealand without government support, and developed an enormous database of information about what it means to belong and what stops people from feeling like they belong. And those conversations have not been purely about race. They've just brought people of many different backgrounds together. And I'm just conscious, having working in the right-wing extremism space, that a lot of people are very triggered by cultural diversity, racism, all these topics, and it actually doesn't bring them across. So it's not saying we shouldn't have a framework. It's just saying that we're going to have to cater for those audiences and think about different ways of framing this conversation.
Yeah, Professor, there are 2 minutes. I promise you 2 minutes.
Go for it.
And it's important that we do that. And there's a reason why the framework is going to be very carefully nuanced. That's why I'm saying it's going to be an imperfect document. It's important that people appreciate that when I'm Human Rights Commission on race discrimination, I'm an activist. There are limitations. We're still a government body. And I have to navigate very, very narrow paths. I still have, funding up to estimates, have senators saying, are you influenced by Marxist, critical theory, race theory, things like that, or saying, what are you doing in systemic racism? Is that about us? And this is where we're navigating, and I need to tackle those topics in the light of what is achievable, right? And the framework will do some of that. It will give us opportunity, including those who don't believe in it, saying, okay, but you got to deal with racism. Come on. And I'll say to, I'll put this open because I've said to him publicly, I said, the Minister of Immigration, I said, when you run the social cohesion policy, you're going to be asked that question by at least 5% saying, what about the race issue? Right? So let us do our job on the race issue, at least if nothing else, as part of the component of social cohesion. So I work with very, very limited, very tight, path. And it's in that area that the opportunities as well to create understanding, create some sort of a place where we can plant a more fertile field of understanding. And it comes down to leadership, people who understand, people who said, I get it and I want to do this. Because there are a lot of issues out there people don't want to go near. And I get more people who sometimes come to me and say, even politicians, oh, I've never experienced racism, so what's the problem? We need your position. It's been said publicly as well by a senator. And so these are issues we confront, but it's also an education process of saying, how do I get to the different place? And how do we get as much as we can out of this?
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'm going to read some of the questions which have been posted, and feel free to answer anyone. If you feel it's in your domain, then go for it, but certainly it's open to all. And the first question says that this report is very informative. I feel like as we want the government to take some actions, is there anything that the Muslim community can do to make a change? So I wonder if maybe Dr. Iner and Rita might want to to respond to this first, and certainly everybody else is welcome to respond to it. So is there anything that the Muslim community can do to make a change?
I think Muslim community is trying more than they can do. As Mr. Chin mentioned, the community is really resilient, but now very frustrated at this point. Remember, it's starting, kind of increasing since 9/11, and now we are in post-Christchurch, and they see now a significant change. So I think Muslim community is already doing what they can do, but my I think emphasis is that it is like a woman raped, and we are asking the raped women, what else you can do to protect yourself? This is really a very vulnerable community already and very disadvantaged. I think we need to really recognize it as Australia's problem, not Muslim community's responsibility, and also a problem that way, because this something happens altogether. We have bystander response. We need also accommodating hate or removing hate. And my, I think, point there was what is next. Also very tangible small steps. If these everyday racism issues are happening in shopping centers and guarded places, let's provide them training. And then it is a very tangible small step, but that will usually break that continuity of harassment in shopping centers, let's say. So and bystanders, if we don't accommodate hate, it will not be that level. So small steps sometimes are still helpful, but if you're not taking these small steps, you know, year by year, and by the end of 2 decades, if you're still having the same conversation, we just see Muslim community frustrated. And my concern is not coming to the point of enough is enough. You know, that is really dangerous. And coming back to the question, Muslim community already did their part. I think more cooperation maybe and more insider, I think, perspectives, but bringing the wider community on board to really tackle this problem for a significant change.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We have quite a number of questions, so please allow me to go through
Professor,
them.
can I
Yes,
just quickly add on to what Dr. Iner have said?
absolutely.
What can the Muslim community do? I know. I'm gonna be careful about saying, you know, putting pressure on victims, and there are clear victims of the Muslim communities being, you know, unjustifiably largely as a committee put on the back foot. But you can do more as a powerful community. And I had a discussion with a Muslim community leader some time ago, a young person, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, look, you know, we're growing very big now, and we're quite a powerful community, you know, about 500,000 strong or more, into probably 6% or more, the doctors, the lawyers, and people who are, you know, gifted, and you are very gifted." And he says, "We're going to be a powerful community, and we're going to be strong, you know, we can do things." And I said to him, and I said, "Strong, powerful," and I said to him, I said, "To do what? That's your question. Your answer will come from you." So number one, the point is you're far more powerful and stronger than you think, and all just victims chasing after racism. There's a lot you can do, and you can find those pockets where your influence is going to be strong, and you make those difference in a way that's going to even help alleviate racism from different pathways. You can find those as a community, say, we could do that. So don't see yourself as saying, "Oh, wait, this 2.6, we're going to be left behind." Well, you're not. Right? You got a lot of contribution and skills and talents. You can tap into that. Question is, how do you do that? And the question is, when you're strong and powerful as a community, what do you do? And what I, as a Chinese Australian, as a citizen, not a risk community, what would I be gaining from your work that you do in your community in building this framework? And you need to be able to formulate that as a community, saying, we have a contribution to make. This is what we would do for Australia, not just about ourselves, getting ourselves. So there's a whole question about chasing equality as well, opportunity and contributions. I want to be on the table. I want to have a say in this as well, not just to be a victim and trying to address racism all the time, right? And how do we do that? It's not easy, because racism is a problem that stops a lot of that happening as well. But that shouldn't be the only reason why you're focused about your capacity as a community. So my view is to encourage you. There's so much you can do, but it must be in a way that contribute constructively to the whole Australia, because the rest of the people who are not Muslim are saying, what about me? How will your world be that will affect my children's world? Right? How would they share that? And if you don't have the vision to points in 15 years, your children, my children, Muslim and Catholics can do this. If we don't have that vision, then it's difficult for people to understand how it's going to work. What's the narrative that you construct?
Right. Well, thank you for that. Does anyone like to say anything more about this particular issue in regards to what the Muslim community can do, or are we satisfied with these responses? I see Rita is about to say something. Go ahead.
So Look, I agree to a part with what Commissioner Chintan just said in terms of us showing our diversity as a community and all the expertise that we have in our community. But I don't think we can be remiss in ignoring the misinformation that is spread and the lack of responsibility that is taken by Australian governments and Australian regulators to deal with that problem, because it's not actually, the community can't do the heavy lifting on that type of work. It's toxic for us, and it's debilitating, and it's actually not our job. But I take your broad point about the broader narrative. I think as a community, we are always changing and having these conversations internally. There's a lot of discussions at the moment, happening even about, for example, issues like women's leadership, the ability to talk about human rights within our community. And it's complex. It's not just a matter of one just government improving or this sector improving. Everyone is on a growth curve here.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm just going to go through some of the other questions, if you don't mind, because of time. One actually perhaps follows up from that, and that is when we talk about misrepresentation of the Muslim and the Muslim narrative. And the report identified that also in terms of media misrepresentation. So one of the questions that have been posted says essentially that the Commissioner rightly focused on anti-racism campaigns. The report also referenced the power of the media and how the perception is that power is being used in an unjust way. And then he asks, what plans have we got to tackle the misrepresentation of Muslims in the media?
Anybody want to have a go at that?
But I'm conscious that I'm talking a lot, so.
Well, me too.
Yes.
Well, it's a round table, so please keep going.
I'll just kick in very quickly. The media, it's a difficult pot to stir in, because we are a liberal, open democracy. It's always that balanced, right? I was speaking to the Jewish community, for example, as a point of argument, and saying, look, I personally have a view about banning Nazi insignia. I think that, I've got a view about it. But in the policy framework, as Human Rights Commissioner, that also support the freedom of expression, it's a very fine point to try and say, where do you draw the line and where are the lines that intersect? So if I didn't have to worry about that, then it's easy. These things should be banned because they're not good for the country. It's easy. But on a framework where you're also defending the right to do other things, that needs to be kept in mind. Media is a difficult one. And we've always even apologized to different countries. Sorry, in the free country, the Prime Minister, I can't help him saying things about you, because that's what this country is about. Now, how do we navigate this? So you navigate it by making sure that there are far more people who work in the industry or knowledgeable about the issues we're talking about, and we engage. So there's a media diversity group is doing that. We're encouraging talking to a lot of media, particularly, unfortunately, mostly in ABC and SBS. I'm hoping it will go into the more commercial media about people who are involved in this area, who understand the nuances of what we're talking about. And it's not just the people who are on the front line, who are news readers and journalists, but the producers. Right. And the way to do this is, I like to say, more Muslims be involved in that area, who are in fact in the production area, who are in the movie industry, who are in the media, because you have a role to play. If you want to look about nation building, well, get into that area, build it, get, and I hope that in due course, there'll be a Muslim Australian who will be in my position, and it should be, right? It should be, and the question is not, why not, and preferably probably even a woman as well with a hijab. Why not? And that's the point, is why not? And that's the kind of thing. And can they make a difference? Well, not all the difference they want to make, but they will make some difference, because they'll be a gatekeeper in some of those things. Like, hang on, that won't work. I see those issues, right? And so it's an important element of that contribution, saying, what can you do far beyond just attacking racism? Said, I want a place to sit in where I can make some influence and impact. Not about those government doing those things. I am the government. I'm a part and parcel of the involvement. And the question would be more about this Muslim community. How do you in fact entrenched and embed yourself into this community as Australians with contribution to make beyond talking about I'm Muslim. Well, yes, you are, but you've got contributions to make far bigger, and you can contribute widely in being able to disperse and deconstruct some of those narratives in places that currently we don't get to sit on. We want to be at the boardrooms in the places where decisions are made. We sometimes don't have people who look like us, who do and think like, the diversity we have. And important for Australia that in the future, that it's going to be a great harmonious community, should have that happening.
Can I just add on media, we have Press Council of Australia have advisory guidelines about using religious terms in headlines, cautioning against the use of Islam, Muslim, that's what, just gratuitously using those in headlines. I think those guidelines are possibly under review soon. They need to be strengthened. And I also think the Press Council process needs to change to include an option for, not an option, but to actually just include conciliation. Just one meeting between our community and a newspaper editor would make a big difference. And we offer meetings all the time. They're never taken up by certain newspaper editors.
And Rita, we're seeking to engage with them. Perhaps out of this meeting, perhaps that's something we can do. Talk to us, work with us, and said, let's make a sufficient representation from a community perspective for all Australia about race issues, about representation. And because we're engaging, seeking to engage the Press Council and the regulators in that area, and it's difficult. But maybe that's something you can do to support us and get a submission together, and then we as a delegation or as a community saying that's what we are looking for to happen.
Excellent. Anna, I see that I see your hand is up. Anna, did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the media angle. In the space of education, we've had for many, many years really poor reporting across the board around complex education issues, mainly with people giving their opinion and being framed as experts. So it was a few years ago, we set up a Media Centre for Education Research Australia, and the role of that organisation is to support journalists essentially to report in more informed ways about education issues. And I've just got to declare I founded that, so that's my initiative. But part of that is that they run, for example, briefings for journalists on complex issues like NAPLAN or, and this is another complex issue, particularly in education. So if you look at the journalists, there's a churn. They don't stay in education portfolios for very long. If they stay 2 years, we're lucky. So, some of it's not intentional. However, they're sitting in a broader context, which, they're often representing and reproducing the discourse that they hear in other places. So some of it's about educating them in gentle ways before things happen and over the long term, and having sort of a systematic approach to that. And I think there is an opportunity to use organisations like that to help the media report in more informed ways. So in this case, education across the lifespan. And I do think that is something that we've seen across education, let alone with issues to do with, sexism, racism, and all of those sorts of things, which are prevalent in our society. And I think educating our journalists and making it easier for them to ask good questions, to report in more nuanced ways is really critical.
Thank you. There's a question that I wonder if maybe Melanie and Anna could comment on this, and that is, I wonder if any of the researchers, policy experts had concerns regarding the idea of cultural competency as a strategic solution. You're muted, Melanie. It's the idea of cultural competency as a strategic solution that the report proposed.
Absolutely, and I think this gets, you can relate it back to the issues with the media as well, in that all of this work is not going to change the white heteronormative patriarchy, those structures of coloniality that sit under everything that Australia was founded on as a white settler colonial nation. So, we can't challenge the Murdoch press and the narrative of the Murdoch press. You're not going to get Muslim hijab wearing women presenting on the Channel 7 news because the Murdoch press knows that's not what's wanted, and they're not going to do that. So I think, you know, cultural competence is the same sort of idea, that we can't shift the normativity of, you know, the white colonial settler narrative through a little bit of cultural competence training. And what cultural competence shall we train them in? You know, I already spoke about the diversity of Muslim identities. We can't just go in and say, here you go, here's your 2 hours cultural competence on teaching Muslim learners. You know, who is the Muslim learner? There's so much complexity in that. Same thing, you know, my area of expertise is around refugee education. We can't just do the 2 hour, here's how you address refugee learners. Who are refugee learners? What diversity do they bring with them? So I think in order to really, for anything to shift, first of all, we have to recognise the foundations of the nation of Australia, which, you know, we're already talking about the resistance to recognising our racist nature and our racist history. If we can't get to that point, then cultural competence training is really in vain, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Well done and well said. There's two other questions that are related to education, if I may focus on those and then turn to the other questions. One says, I'm interested to learn what the panelists feel can be done to combat experiences of overt and subtle Islamophobia in the workplace, particularly the tertiary educational sector. How do we combat these experiences of overt and subtle Islamophobia in the workplace and in the tertiary educational sector? Anyone?
I'm going to jump into this so that someone else can also follow through. I was a director of multicultural engagement at Sullivan University for 3 years. My job was to look into, you know, cultural diversity in our sphere, but also trying to help, you know, pivot the university as you know, place of cultural diversity. And you know, it's not easy. They're trying to change a culture or a place to when the emphasis is about education and about obviously trying to get a profit in as well in between. But when you have a role to play and you can play it in some ways and you can start creating pathways, it's still an important role to play. So where do you start with that? It's creating a culture. Now we put together a statement of a charter. Now you might say, well, it's just used as a document. Well, that might be fine. That might be true. But at least there's a charter there. People have said, well, grudgingly or otherwise, they're prepared to put up there. So there's commitment 8 points. Right, and then we set out and saying, okay, and 12 areas of which we want to emphasize. Now we're not going to get all of that in, and unfortunately I left before to do a lot of that, and became a commissioner. It is then breaking it down and doing what we can to make those differences. And it's that opportunity for us that presents ability of being more specifically geared towards you know, a big picture, and then breaking it down to areas where it works. For example, we'll be talking about international students, which is a big component of the university, but there isn't a clear policy about supporting them. You know, and I haven't come across too many race-based issues or religious ones because they're all framed and categorized into different areas. Like your cultural awareness and blah, 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 or, you know, just violent young men, you know, who don't understand the laws and none of that. So there isn't the capacity to do that. But when you bring in I, it's different, saying, hang on, isn't there that component that needs to be looked at? And where are the policies to deal with that? Now, where they've done a good job, and I'll finish up by saying, where they've done a good job is in the gender issue. Universities do a very good job, much better anyway. And we can follow some of that pattern about how they've done that, because universities are, you know, normatively geared towards supporting gender equality. They're very big on that. I mean, I've got vice chancellors who tell me, we need to make sure that my council has got 50% women. But they don't tell me about the same of having ensure that there's a diversity of cultural groups as well, right? Because it's a natural thing to do. We need to have as many women as there are men in our council. But anything else, well, that's a tough one. Well, why is it tough? I need to begin creating opportunities where we create those opportunities that will make it work. So it's bringing it down, making having clear objectives and say, we'll push for that to happen as well. Can I ask Professor quickly, we're talking about media. The framework that we're designing will have a media component as well as it would have any other component in sports or whatever. And that will be about saying, how do media behave, or what's expectation of media in a culturally diverse, anti-racist country, or about expectations of what they can do. And they might even say, look, perhaps all journalists should go to some sort of education or, go through a program, right? Or why not, as should be judges in this country about diversity, right? And so these are opportunities for us to put into the framework what we think are important things.
Excellent. We've got so many questions. I think we need another 2 hours, but so there is one question I'd like to just quickly ask, and hopefully we can get a quick response. And that is from one of our colleagues who says, thank you for engaging us in addressing this significant societal issue. And in my role as president of the Australian Curriculum Studies Association and CRISI Inclusion and Wellbeing researcher, I'm interested in the role of national curriculum in supporting the recommendations of this report. So what is the role of the national curriculum in supporting the recommendations of this report?
I think the place to start with the Indigenous education programs. There's a lot of work in that area and there's a lot of push, but there's also a lot of pushback. So the lessons to learn is to learn and look at the pathway with the Indigenous is dealing with this issue. And we find it's not easy. And it is a national body and it's got tremendous political influence and ideologies attached to it. And there's been some resistances and a lot of progress. So that is where the issue is. I mean, the ideal world is be a curriculum in a body that understands and have curriculum that addresses those issues. But how do we get there? And it comes back to the policy, political spectrum of getting things done.
Absolutely. Anna, Melin, did you want to add to that?
Well, I think curriculum is actually critical. And I guess, the multicultural statement is, as you rightly said, Commissioner, it's not a policy as such, but they're sort of big policy agendas, and curriculum is driving decisions about what schools and teachers do and how they educate students. So, but I think the curriculum is important, but the pedagogy that goes with that is critical. And for me, I'm very interested in the environments, how do people feel in there? How do we build relationships? How do we build connections and those sorts of things? I think it's all connected, and you can't just take the curriculum on its own, but it's just one piece of the bigger puzzle. And so I share the Commissioner's view that you've got to find pockets of influence, places where you can influence and change things. And, we've got a lot of people here who are experts in all sorts of different ways, and finding their space and where they can do that, I think is
and Anna, you're right. I mean, curriculum is critical, but it has to be sophisticated. It has to be more than the shallow, intellectual exercise. I mean, there was about Muslim in this country contribution. It's always about the Afghan Cavaliers. Well, hang on, 2.6% of population. All you talk about the Cavaliers and the early monks, right? It has to be more than that. And what is narrative? What is the curriculum about this contribution at this point about what Muslims are doing for this country?
It's similar with the national, the standards of the teacher standards, it says understand the cultural identity. What does understand mean? We need more than that.
And it's like a discourse on Chinese contribution. Now it's about the gold mines and the contribution they made. And that's 150 years ago.
Excellent. All right. I'm aware of time. It is 10:30 and I need to close this session. And before doing so, allow me to thank the Commissioner once again for undertaking this very significant initiative and for producing this report. So please accept our heartfelt gratitude and our warm greetings from our community and other communities for taking this very brave step of engaging in this in the report. And as Iner said at the outset, the significance, perhaps, or one of the areas of significance of this report is that the fact it's not coming from the Muslims who are saying, hey, we are experiencing Islamophobia, please open your eyes, but it's coming from the Australian Human Rights Commission, which I guess solidifies the previous researches that have been done in this area, and indeed empowers the community by providing a voice for the community. So thank you very much for that, Commissioner, and I'm sure we'll be engaged with you more in order to, I think, because the challenge for all of us now is to action those recommendations and see how we collectively, and not to leave the burden on the shoulders of the Muslim community, but rather to recognize genuinely that this is an Australian issue, a dilemma that Australia has to deal with, a significant problem, and that all of us can take part in trying to make those recommendations come to fruition. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you very much. And I do enjoy it. Can I just, before you really finished up, then I wanted to come in and say more, is this, I'm not supposed to be saying this as a bureaucrat, but I'm enjoying myself immensely. I thank you for the opportunity. But the reason why I agreed to this session is this, that it wasn't meant to be just a piece of document that sits there on the shelf. It was supposed to bring life. And I'm inviting the community to take it up with me. I mean, the CVE issue, I want to take this up further. I want to have a discourse with the law and order, apparatchiks of this country. But I want you to be going with me in this journey. And I don't know all the details, I don't know the issues. And you need to tell me, only work with me. So perhaps we can do a joint submission on an approach, to the authorities and say, look, hang on, talk to us. It's not all fair and well, there are issues there, and how can we improve on that? And the same with the media, right? The media problem, we know it, but how do we improve on that? And you're the community is most affected by that. Talk to us, work with us, use us. We don't carry a big weapon. We don't have baton and all of that, but we do a big torch. If that's enough, well, that's enough. But it's an opportunity for you to share the torch with us and say, look, how do we use this?
Well, thank you very much. And a warm thank you to our excellent panelists, Rita, Derya, Melanie, and Anna. You have contributed tremendously to this session. You've added insight and wisdom and much value to the discussion. So thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, but I'm very grateful to have you with us today. And to our participants from across Australia, thank you so much for joining us. And I do hope that we have follow-up sessions to explore some of these key areas, whether it's to do with education or media or otherwise. So thank you very much once again, and I hope you have a most wonderful day. Enjoy yourselves, and if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, stay safe and take care.
Take
Bye,
care,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.